In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. In the Mirage universe, the Soviet Union still exists, but it wouldn't be the Soviet Union you or I recognize. And that is for the same reason that it still exists in the first place. Because of supers, and especially because of Comrade Cosmos. Comrade Cosmos, as an Ashvelian, is far longer lived than humans. He witnessed the revolution, the revolutions. He watched the burgeoning of the Soviet state, witnessed the world wars, and rose to prominence alongside Joseph Stalin. Comrade Cosmos was allied to that great mass murderer, and he learned. There is almost no prominent version of communism that cannot be defined by its leader, its perpetrator. Stalinism, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Trotskyism, even those which haven't been named after a leader, the later versions of communism in the Soviet Union of our world, are greatly influenced by the interpretations of the man in charge. And Comrade Cosmos was no different. When the revolution failed to spread much farther than Russia, Stalin defined his vision as socialism in one country. Comrade Cosmos was similar, focusing much of his energy on improving Russia and the so-called republics it absorbed. But as you might suspect, his twisted utopianism gave a rather different spin on what it meant to improve the country. Every man, woman, and child by nature had access to the power of their labor. Under communism, land, resources, and tools were provided to them, and thus everyone would get what they deserved, and the entire country would become productive, or so the theory goes. Except, of course, there was always the problem of incentives. It's not simply the matter of no rewards for better performance. Even under Stalin, there were such programs, even some monetary incentives, and the Stakhanovite movement, named after one Alexei Stakhanov, who broke records in the coal mines. The movement named after him encouraged such industriousness, but these would not last. No, the greater problem was the other incentives. The incentives to perform more poorly. If you exceeded your quota, you were patted on the back and told the quota was raised for next year. If you fell short, you would be punished, but you also might have more resources allocated to you in order to meet the quota next time. So of course, the best solution was only to just exceed the quota. Get some of the offered rewards, avoid the punishments, and avoid having the quota raised too high. And to innovate? Certainly not. Inventing a labor-saving device wouldn't actually decrease the labor demanded of you. That labor would simply be reallocated to somewhere else. There were always other projects to be completed. And furthermore, such innovation wouldn't be yours. It belonged to everyone, and anyone who has entered a public bathroom knows just how high in esteem something available to all is held. Your name may well be recognized, but so what? There is no resting on your laurels, only the next quota. So how did Comrade Cosmos solve this problem? Through the special application of greater incentives, greater punishments, and superpowers. First, Comrade Cosmos distinguished between innovators and laborers. To the innovators, he offered villas and stimulating activities, and of course a healthy dose of brainwashing. He made sure their environment was superficially a comfortable and equivalent one to the laborers, but with a fierce undercurrent of competition for prestige. As for the laborers, that was a simpler solution. The well-being of all was the result of labor and resources, so while it was the responsibility of the state to provide the resources, it was up to the workers to provide the labor. And if you didn't, you were robbing from everyone else. In Comrade Cosmos' Soviet Union, you didn't own anything, not even yourself. If you failed to do your fair share, well, you'd make up for it. Cosmos' Commissars saw to that. And when they weren't enforcing proper labor output, they were watching the country and devising new schemes to push it above and beyond the Western world. And in this moment, they were on a small Mediterranean island. An island with an intercontinental ballistic missile. It was to that island that the Stormbreakers were headed, alerted that someone, likely the Soviets, had stolen that ICBM. The threat of its launch too great, they set off to reclaim it. The Stormbreakers launched themselves from the jet, no man in the lead. Crystal Crusader's crystal spirit created an aura around him that picked him up, flying him through the air. Psychurge's green cape also allowed him to fly, as did Kid Cosmos' Ashvelian biology. Just before the remaining 4 hit the ground, No Man held out his left hand towards the land. Using his powers, he cancelled out his own momentum relative to the ground. His power didn't bring things to a stop as if they had smashed into a barrier. It cancelled out momentum, erasing it completely. So despite falling from thousands of feet and stopping nearly instantly, No Man was entirely unfazed. So too were Sekhmet Scion, Dauntless Dynamo, and Renaissance Man, as they fell into a second field created by No Man's right hand held above him. The other 3 had fallen in a tight formation and so easily fell within range of No Man's second field. Crusader, Kid Cosmos, and Psychurge reported in through a psychic network the latter had created. While it relied on Psychurge to maintain the network, it meant their messages couldn't be intercepted except by an incredibly powerful psychic. "Looks like the east entrance is going to be the easiest access to the control room," Crusader reported. "Strange," Kid added. "I don't see any personnel around. It's like everyone just got up and leapt into the ocean." "I don't detect their thoughts either," Psychurge confirmed. "But there is someone here. Something is blurring my contact with their minds. I cannot tell who they are, but they feel hostile." "Do you have a location?" Sekhmet Scion asked. "Somewhere near the control room, but I cannot tell for sure." "Count?" 6 to 8. "Bet the Comrade is one of them," Renaissance Man said to their leader. "It could be a Spec Ops team. It might not be the premier Commissars," Scion cautioned, but with little conviction. "Then what do you say, I take a look-see?" Dynamo said. "Quick and dirty. Don't take any chances," Scion ordered. "Never dream of it," Dynamo replied, giving a great big grin that hid whatever he was really feeling. He disappeared in a blur of red and white. "If it is the Premier Commissars, this could get bloody," No Man warned. "Then be sure to be at the top of your game," Scion answered. "And remember, we're here to stop a launch before anything else." Dynamo rushed to a stop in front of Sekhmet Scion. "Path is clear, but the controls to launch have been rerouted to an auxiliary control panel into a loading room. Big track down the middle with cranes, equipment, big pillars, and catwalks all over." "An ambush. Would be a great place for it. I didn't stick around to find out." Scion sent her next query through the psychic network. "Psychurge, does this line up with where you sense the intruders?" Dynamo sent a mental image of the layout and the room he saw to everyone on the network. During a fight, sending images like this would be a serious risk, as the heroes could be distracted between what they were really seeing and the image implanted into their mind. But out here, it was quite useful, and allowed the team to get a good look at their battleground before stepping foot inside. "No, it doesn't," Psychurge said, almost excitedly. "The others are at least 2 rooms over from this one. There is no line of sight. Unless they left a bomb or some other trap, there is no ambush in that room. They're still in the primary control room." "Perhaps they weren't aware the controls rerouted," No Man suggested. "Don't get too excited," Renaissance Man warned. "It smells too good to be true." "Unfortunately, we don't have time for caution," Scion said. "Dynamo, scout the room. Flyers, prepare an entrance from above. Everyone else, with me, into the room." By the time Scion, No Man, and Renaissance Man ran into the dimly lit loading bay, Dynamo had run around it several times, quickly at first, then more diligently. He had found nothing, which hardly calmed Renaissance Man's increasingly paranoid worryings. It hardly put Rashida's mind at ease either, for that matter. Crystal Crusader had landed on the roof above the room and loosed his crystal spirit, which did what it was made for. It fused with the material of the roof and pulled it together into a giant golem of sheetrock, concrete, and steel, tearing those materials from the roof and landing in the chamber below. Psychurge, Kid Cosmos, and Crusader himself, though, still waited above, just in case something were to go wrong. Scion scanned the room and saw the control panel near the far wall, where 2 sets of double doors led deeper into the base. "Incoming!" Psychurge warned suddenly. Almost immediately after, 2 very different figures burst into the room. Breaking double doors off their hinges, a man in mechanical armor with flaring rockets burning from his forearms, legs, and back shot in at supersonic speeds. He was a blur, while the second figure was much more ponderous. A blob with round, thick arms and legs seemed to step right through the wall as if it weren't there. The figure stood 10 feet tall and was bright, glowing yellow-green, a dangerous, sickly color. As Scion was about to give an order, the lightning-fast rocket man spun himself around and thicker smoke began to pour from his engines. It spread throughout the room and quickly obscured their sight. "Back off," Scion ordered. "You want I should?" Dynamo began to ask. "Not yet. Psych-urge." "They are entering, holding position, consulting with each other." "Now, Diego," Rashida ordered. Dynamo rushed ahead, zipped back and forth, kicking up air currents that started to clear the smoke. As it did, Rashida got a good look at their opponents. It was the Premiers. Comrade Cosmos, black coat emblazoned with the red hammer and sickle, stood at the fore. Thick black mustache, thinning black hair, cold gray-blue eyes, but a depth of hidden power, a monstrous volcano appearing like a silent mountain. The second Commissar Scion also knew too well, Nadezhda Irenkova, nicknamed Ironclaw by Diego and some of the intelligence agencies, second in command of the Premier Commissariat. Prematurely graying hair dropped down in a braid from the cap over her young face. Her body was encased with a black power suit, lined with veins of machinery. Her forearms and lower legs had thicker white armor, which mimicked the concussive beams and shock waves of an Ashvelian. The black power suit and other experiments gave her the strength, durability, and electrostatic field to nearly complete the artificial Ashvelian's arsenal. All she was missing were the I-beams. There was one other that she recognized, a man in a full bodysuit, covering even his face. It was armored lightly, allowing for more flexibility, but it was the head that stood out. It also was prominently decorated with a hammer and sickle, except the hammer wasn't a hammer. The symbol plastered over the otherwise blank face, the head of the hammer should have been right between his eyes. But instead of a hammerhead, there was a single, perfectly circular, glowing, reddish-orange eye. It gave the effect of a magnifying glass in a sickle, which, while less memorable to hear, accurately defined him as the watchful eye of the group, equipped with a myriad of different enhanced sight abilities, from thermal to X-ray and beyond. Add to that a powerful bolt of energy he could emit from that same eye and a more than lethal hand-to-hand ability and experience, and he was a formidable assassin and spy. And he had no other moniker to the Stormbreakers than simply the Eye. Aside from the Giant and the Rocket Man, there were two others Scion didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't surprising, as even in the elites of Cosmos' Commissars, those unsatisfactory often disappeared. Neither of the two looked terribly imposing at first, but Scion knew better than to underestimate them. These two were men dressed from head to toe in some sort of unibody costume. One looked more like armor or scales jaggedly sticking out at odd angles over his body, and which were painted a myriad of shades of purple and blue. The other was almost entirely silver, and an incredibly polished reflective silver at that. The only exceptions were a vest, utility belt, black gloves, and black metal spring-loaded limbs nearly flush to his arms and legs. No doubt some sort of strength enhancer. Standing before them, Psych-urge could now identify the Mirrored One as the source of the psychic interference, and assessments of the Commissars flew across the psychic network, each of the Stormbreakers offering their best intuitive assessment in the blink of an eye. And then, simultaneously, both Comrade Cosmos and Sekhmet Scion came to the same conclusion. Time was critical. There was no point wasting it. Each ordered the attack. The Stormbreakers identified who they could most likely stand against and sought them out. Dauntless Dynamo would take the Rocket Man, as they both could demonstrably outpace the rest. Crystal Crusader and his golem would try to take out the giant Plasmic Man who had walked through the wall. Psych-urge flew towards the Mirrored One, seeking to take out their psychic powerhouse. Renaissance Man would take his own centuries of martial prowess against the Eye's expertise. Kid Cosmos leapt towards Ironclaw, real versus artificial Ashvelian, and as Sekhmet Scion and Comrade Cosmos naturally sought each other out as the leaders of their group, that left No Man to face the strange, spiked man. Except it didn't last. No Man kept his distance, ready to react to any number of possible attacks from his opponent. What he didn't expect was for the man to suddenly shatter into 100 purple and blue shards. Each spike or scale became one shard, separating from the rest until his entire body was nothing more than a loose grouping of 4-inch-long spikes. And as soon as that happened, the now broken man's pieces flew back and up, soaring away from No Man before he could rush into range to do anything. They flew across the battlefield. They nipped at Crystal Crusader, who was cut badly by the first few, but blocked the rest with his shield. Meanwhile, his Crystal Spirit's golem swung its giant fist at the Plasmic Giant, hitting him square in the chest. Pools of the plasma or liquid or whatever it was splashed out and behind the giant, burning into the walls and floor beyond. The golem's hand was burning, and the crystal spirit sloughed off the contaminated, hissing and bubbling surface material. The glowing giant stumbled backward as if wounded, but the glowing, burning poison that had been knocked off slithered back to him. Reformed, he seemed to cool, the glowing dimming and the green darkening until he turned into a ball of disgustingly overwrought flesh. Muscle upon muscle upon muscle forming his flesh now, still giving him the bloated and round appearance. But now he wasn't some quasi-liquid. He was substance, and when he struck back at the golem, what appeared as mere flesh was enough to rip away chunks of the concrete and steel of the other giant. Crusader, free of the passing shards, circled to the giant's back and leapt towards it. But the giant saw. He turned just enough to extend an arm back towards Crusader. It, and only it, became the glowing green plasma again. Just in time, Crusader held out his shield as he hit. He splashed some of the poisonous burning substance away before being deflected from his attack. The giant still had a solid hand and body to fend off the golem's next strike, and the sprayed plasma was already returning. The shards of the broken man continued on their journey, whipping past Scion and Kid Cosmos. Though they made a passing attack at both, they hardly put effort into it. Both of these Stormbreakers were too hardy to be seriously injured by such an attack. Kid Cosmos and Ironclaw were battling in midair, Ironclaw at first trying to get in close to neutralize the power Kid had over her, the I-beams, but moving in, Kid brought out his bat. Humans use weapons because it amplifies the damage they can do. Super strength doesn't nullify this principle. It just means you need a material that won't break from the more strenuous use. And wouldn't you know it, Kid Cosmos' bat was made of just such a material. The swings were devastating, even to Ironclaw's Ashvelian levels of strength. She blocked one blow with a forearm, but took a serious hit to her side. Determined, she closed to a wrestling distance and used her left hand to push aside Kid's right, the one with the bat. They tumbled through the sky, smashing into pillars and walls for a bit, wrestling for a better position. But as soon as Kid had the chance, a bat to Ironclaw's head sent her reeling. Even though it wasn't armored like the rest of her body, the enhancements protected it as well, otherwise she would have been dead. But she had been tossed away. She realized the danger of close-quarters combat and fired her concussive blasts to slam Kid into the wall. He hit hard, but instead of flying out of the position and weaving through the air, he aimed with his eyes and lanced out with his own beams at her. Ironclaw dived and prepared a new attack pattern. Meanwhile, Sekhmet Scion was attempting to break through Cosmos' defenses. He was hardier but couldn't heal. She was easier to damage but could. Long experience had taught her that while her touch could be devastating to humans, it only had a mild effect on Ashvelians. And with the Comrade wearing gloves in addition to his heavy coat, only his head offered bare skin to make contact. Instead, she ducked and weaved from his attacks, and when an opportunity presented itself, she slashed with the thin blades on her boots and bracers. Quick, powerful strikes. The Comrade recognized the strategy, and took to the air, blasting with I-beams to inflict a steady stream of damage on Sekhmet Scion. She responded by leaping athletically into the air, kicking off from a pillar nearby and hurling herself into the catwalks above. Cosmos quickly rose to nullify the high ground advantage which Scion had briefly claimed and continued in with the I-beams. Scion ripped off the bracer and blade of her left arm and then held it up to block. The beam started to burn through her arm, but she blocked out the pain. She charged straight forward at maximum speed, taking Comrade Cosmos unaware. He raised his arm to let out a concussive beam to push her back, but it was too late. Scion tossed the removed bracer to her rapidly healing left arm and grabbed Comrade's with her right. Using it, stiff as a board from the Comrade's incredible strength, she lifted herself up and swung her leg for a kick that jabbed a blade straight into the side of Cosmos' head. He winced in pain, his other hand reaching up to grab her, but Scion swung around in the opposite direction and gripped onto Cosmos' back and started smashing into his back with her right arm. The Comrade spun himself around in an attempt to shake Scion, but she was too strong. Instead, he launched himself over one of the miniature loading cranes in the room and let himself fall face up into it. His back, Rashida on it, slammed into the metal. He kicked his feet upwards, releasing a shockwave of energy that forced the two of them further into the crane, crumpling it and shearing off metal. The damage was too much for Scion, who released Cosmos. He quickly flew away, spun around, and unleashed a concussive beam to slam Rashida into a nearby pillar, adding to the damage. But just as he did so, Rashida threw the bladed bracer. Right on target, and with an incredible force, it slashed across Comrade Cosmos' cheek, and his concussive beam quickly vanished as his hands flew instinctively to his face. When they lowered, Rashida had leapt from the ruined crane, her body rapidly healing, soon to be good as new. Comrade Cosmos disregarded the pain from his wounds and eyed the enemy leader approvingly. The shards of the Broken Man flashed past again, adding some wounds to Rashida and provoking the Comrade's next attack, but before it could land, they were off again. Dynamo and the Rocket Man flew past in a blur, knocking some of the shards off course. The Rocket Man could also launch powerful missiles, which were causing explosions throughout the large room, but they couldn't keep up with Dynamo. Dynamo, when touching the floor, could charge up his power, not just for his super speed, but for dramatic boosts of strength and damage. But these powerful strikes didn't quite break the Rocket Man's armor, and the latter learned quickly to utilize his ability to fly to avoid the strikes when they were coming. Dynamo could run along the walls and pillars and catwalks with his supersonic speed, but he had to return to the ground to recharge this as well. As both speedsters failed to damage the other, the shards of the Broken Man quickly determined they wouldn't be breaking the stalemate and instead dove towards Psychurge. The crystalline Psychurge and the reflective Mirrored Man were exchanging a few blows, but the real battle was happening in their minds. The Mirrored Man had a strange effect. He didn't lash out with traditional psychic attacks aimed at breaking the other's concentration or damaging their psyche. Instead, he had some sort of passive presence. A pressure that emanated throughout the psychic plane. It was a nebulous wall of cruelty, doubt, and anger that no matter how hard Psychurge tried, he couldn't penetrate or slow down. And the Mirrored Man's mind was just as impossible to break through, so he couldn't identify the nature of the psychic field. When the shards of the Broken Man slammed into Psychurge, leaving cuts and chips across his red body, he briefly let up his attentions from the Mirrored Man. When the shards passed, he concentrated on reforming his body. His body was merely a construct and could be molded if he wished it, though a human form was the most natural as he could instinctively control it. If it was completely shattered, Psychurge wouldn't be dead. His true body was trapped on the spirit plane, where he could make another construct with enough time. However, that construct could only find its way back to the physical world so long as the green cape survived. The cape didn't just give his construct body flight, it gave him his connection to the material plane. Fortunately, it was undamaged, and in the moments he spent repairing the minor injuries, he wasn't focusing on the Mirrored Man. When he returned his attention in time to block another powerful blow, he realized the pressure emanating from his opponent had let up just the slightest bit. Of course, Psychurge realized, he's a mirror. Perhaps not entirely, but part of his power seemed to involve using and redirecting the aggression or pain of those he was facing. In that case, it was time that Psychurge and the others redirected their focus. Psychurge flew up and away to re-establish the psychic network between his team, away from the interference of the mirror. They had plenty of time to observe. Now it was time to strategize. Meanwhile, the shards of the Broken Man went to strike the final member of the Stormbreakers, Renaissance Man. He had quickly dismantled the Eye's defenses and landed several strikes to the body. It didn't take the Eye's great observational powers to realize he was outmatched. The Eye was devastating in close-quarters combat. He was lethal to virtually any human he came across. But when paired against literal centuries of fine-tuning and training, it was simply not good enough, which meant he had to fall back on his own decided advantage. He had quickly distanced himself from Renaissance Man and began firing his powerful 2-inch thick red laser beam. Renaissance Man used his considerable athletic skill to maneuver out of the paths of the beam, but he still got scorched from glancing blows. He pressed the attack, aiming for the head to try to neutralize the laser, but just as much he carefully watched the body language of the Eye, preemptively dodging real and possible laser strikes. The Eye blasted at his feet and Renaissance Man lightly danced back. No problem, he simply drew his rapier. Extending the weapon with one arm, his reach doubled in one move. But he didn't stop there. He grabbed throwing weapons with his left, tossing darts at the Eye to control his opponent even more. While the Eye backed towards a pillar with a ladder to the catwalks, he had no opportunity to climb it. Renaissance Man had dominated his opponent. Until the Broken Man's shards streaked towards him. Renaissance Man saw them coming from the corner of his eye. He sidestepped and leapt acrobatically, twisting himself around in a near-miracle feat that managed to avoid the first dozen strikes. But there were too many, and they could react more quickly and more dynamically than Renaissance Man could hope to. They sliced through him, tearing at his flesh as he was knocked to the ground. Grievously injured, he was a sitting duck for the laser blast from the Eye. But the Eye hesitated for a split second too long. He was caught between deciding whether to finish off the hero or to climb the ladder to assume a better vantage point on the fight. While he quickly realized that it would be more advantageous to finish Renaissance Man now that he had the opportunity, the Stormbreaker was just a hair quicker. Injured as he was still capable of reaching into a pouch and tossing out several small packages. In a series of loud pops, each one burst into a bright white explosion that dazzled anyone looking their way. The scattering pops were like bursts from a firework, and after they were gone, left behind a thick smoke. The Eye fired twice into the smoke, but didn't stay long. He turned and climbed up the ladder, no doubt recognizing by the time the smoke cleared, Renaissance Man would be long gone. The shards of the Broken Man didn't give up that easily, however. Crisscrossing the area, they mapped out every hiding place until they found the wounded hero slithering in between stacks of crates. The shards flew upwards, gathered into a storm, and then arced downwards to finish their work, and suddenly halted just before diving into the little gorge between the crates. No Man clenched his hand into a fist, altering the field that caught the shards. Now, instead of both his hand and whatever in his field being reduced to absolute stillness, the shards within the field would not move relative to his hand, but his hand was free to do as it liked. So when he lifted his hand, the shards lifted as well, like they were on an invisible tray strapped to that hand. No Man walked over to where an office jutted into the loading bay. He stood at one of the corners, in line with the wall looking into the larger room, and swung his hand, and the shards, around with it. The shards whipped around and then were forcefully embedded into the wall, trapped there. Then a powerful blast of energy struck No Man. He reeled, held out a hand to put up one of his fields to defend himself, but the second beam, like the first, was energy, not matter. It was unhindered by the field and slammed No Man backward into a far wall where he collapsed into unconsciousness. The Eye, standing on the catwalks above, clicked on his radio and began to issue reports of the Stormbreakers' positions, seeing the entire battlefield through his vantage point and enhanced vision. And then he was quickly silenced as Dynamo slammed a powerful charged fist into his chest, sending him flying into a pillar and toppling over like a rag doll. "Good idea. Too bad we had it first," Diego said. "No time to waste," Sykerge chided him, also flying high and now commanding the battlefield. "Got it," Dynamo replied, zipping back down to the ground floor and jabbing at each of the shards partly embedded into the wall, ensuring that each of them would be buried far enough in that the Broken Man wouldn't escape for some time. Dynamo glanced back at the fight. He saw Crystal Crusader's golem knock the Rocket Man back, and then noticed Ironclaw flying up to strike at Sykerge. "Not so fast," Diego said, and burst off to counter her. They just got their tactical advantage, their eye in the sky. He wasn't about to lose it. He leapt to intercept Ironclaw midair when the giant stepped in his way and turned that bright, sickly green. Midair, Dynamo splashed through the giant and howled in pain as the burning fluid started eating through his armor. He lost all sense of where he was. Sykerge dodged Ironclaw's strike and saw Diego fly past, hurting bad. He sent off a telepathic message, and an instant later, Sekhmet Scion leapt into the catwalk levels and knocked Ironclaw off her course towards Sykerge. Sykerge dropped to the ground in front of the giant, who had just reclaimed the acid or plasma or whatever substance it was that his body turned into. Still glowing bright green, the figure stepped forward and then dissolved into a stream of the hazardous substance, rushing straight towards Sykerge. His green cape detached and shot upwards as his crystalline body was engulfed. As the stream roared past him, Sykerge turned with the current. The giant reformed and seemed briefly befuddled by Sykerge's undamaged body. He quickly recovered and turned back into a meaty mountain of muscle, swinging both arms together to crash like cymbals against Sykerge and shatter him. Sykerge stepped forward, held out an arm, and let himself get caught between the giant's arms in an unintended bear hug. Then, with his extended arm, he reached over and jabbed 2 fingers and a thumb onto the giant's forehead. The psychic attack was instant, and the giant was hardly prepared. He collapsed into a heap as Sykerge's cape flew back down and clamped itself once more onto his back. With a sudden shattering, the Rocket Man plowed into Sykerge's back. Crystal shards of the psychic's body flew off in every direction, and Sykerge just barely keeping enough focus to hold his body together. The Rocket Man released him for an instant, flew over him, and at the same time fired 2 rockets from his arms which plowed Sykerge into the ground before exploding, the Rocket Man having flown past even before they detonated. Sykerge's left leg and right arm had been blown to brilliantly sparkling bits by the explosions, and his cape had been tattered, but it was still there. In his last moments of consciousness, he told it to flee just as the Rocket Man blasted back at him from the other direction, slammed into him once more, tossing him across the room and into the far wall. Meanwhile, Sekhmet Scion exchanged blows with Ironclaw, who was impressively strong. Her ability to fly was making this more of a challenge. To fix that, Scion feinted and then struck with her remaining bladed bracer at Ironclaw's boot. The blade, an exceptionally strong and sharp one, lashed through the machinery. The cut was small, but it was deep enough. While Ironclaw could still fly, it was far more difficult. Flying required such precision that she made the obvious choice and landed on the catwalk, disregarding the ability. Scion had already anticipated Irenkova's move before she made it. While the artificial Ashvelian raised her hand to send a concussive beam smashing Sekhmet Scion into the pillar behind her, the leader of the Stormbreakers used her own incredible strength to rip the catwalk in two. Both women tumbled to the floor. Both landed in expert rolls that absorbed whatever minor damage the fall might have inflicted to their enhanced biologies. Ironclaw set up to immediately fire the concussive bolts again, thinking to pin Scion. But she had already neutralized the threat. On the ground, Scion had more room to dodge back and forth, and quickly evaded the beams Ironclaw shot out towards her. Ironclaw braced for the hand-to-hand brawl, and she held her own well enough. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't truly Ashvelian. A minor jab that hit her on the cheek did no real damage to her. It was too quick and too late for that, retreating back rather than following through. Ironclaw thought nothing of it, even as the corners of Sekhmet Scion's mouth twitched upwards in a moment of gratifying victory. She fought on, for 3 more seconds. Then the impulse that had traveled from Scion's hand into Irenkova's all-too-human body completed its task across her nervous system. Everything slowed down, and she began to collapse, having fallen victim to the mystical touch of Sekhmet Scion. In a blur of motion, Scion's blade sliced across the gauntlets, boots, and power nodes of Ironclaw's suits, rendering it inoperable. It was a minor gesture, as she was already passing out, and it could be repaired later, but it meant that if she revived now, she would be of no threat. A burst of pain seared through Sekhmet Scion's mind. The falling body of Irenkova melted away, as did the loading bay. It was outside her mother's house. The falling figure was Khepri. No, Rashida thought as the pain tore through her mind. She both did and did not know what it meant, her grandmother standing over her mother, a claw-like hand having just released Khepri's head. When she first had seen this, she only understood that her grandmother had attacked her mother. She had only known the little her mother had shared with her. Little because Rashida had been too young to understand. But she would learn. She would learn the hard way. She would learn what that grip had meant. What had been done when the grandmother she had been told to flee from finally caught up with the two of them. Now her grandmother fell over as well, but unlike Khepri's, her eyes were lifeless. Her body fell over, useless now. But she wasn't dead. Not in soul. Khepri rose, but it wasn't Rashida's mother anymore. It was the vicious spirit that had just left its former body behind. As Sekhmet doubled over in pain, the mirrored man a few feet behind her, Crystal Crusader leapt in the path of the Rocket Man's next attack. He braced behind his shield, and even with the leftover charges Crystal Spirit had left with him to enhance his endurance, the blow from the speeding Commissar sent a shockwave through him that left him sprawled on the floor. The Rocket Man briefly switched course, then decided that Crystal Crusader was perfect prey and circled around. Orson Fiennes had just enough time to raise his shield again when he hit. Crusader's bones rattled from the impact, and the Rocket Man pushed him skidding across the floor until slamming him into a wall. Even dazed and barely conscious, Crusader still kept his shield up. The Rocket Man's fist dug into it. The Soviet Super primed a rocket on his forearm, preparing to fire and detonated at point-blank range. "Gotcha," Crusader said. And suddenly, the Crystal Spirit merged with the Rocket Man's suit. The rocket engines pointed straight down, and he was ripped upwards, bursting through the ceiling. In a moment, the Crystal Spirit would send him over the sea, burst the rockets and suit apart, and let him fall down into the water before returning to his partner. But he didn't return fast enough. Comrade Cosmos' hand shot out and gripped onto the Crusader's white uniform. The evil of every one of Rashida's ancestors flooded her mind. Their terrible power, passed down generation to generation of nigh-identical offspring, a lineage of powerful women, but women who used that power to subvert the wills of others, to dominate their subjects, to rule and profit. The irrational guilt that, coming from such a line, struck within Rashida on occasion, was sharpened to a razor's edge and cut through her heart. Her vow to do good and to try to make up for this legacy meant nothing in the face of this onslaught. It was a pitiful child's cry in the face of the true terrors of the world. She was tainted. The concussive blast from Kid Cosmos knocked the mirror aside, but he quickly recovered thanks to the metal enhancements on his limbs. Sekhmet Scion was still dazed and reeling, out of the fight. That didn't bother Kid. He went in swinging. The mirror didn't have to do anything. The bat whiffed the air as Kid's face contorted with pain. He jabbed at the Ashfelian, landing a couple of quick strikes as he gripped his forehead with his free hand. A couple more blows landed, though they did little to the alien. Then Kid Cosmos lowered his hand, his face still screwed up with pain, but his eyes opened in a primal rage. He charged forward, screaming a guttural shriek, and this time his swing didn't miss. The bat cracked into the side of the mirrored man's head, and he fell with one blow. He fell, but the blows didn't stop. Kid Cosmos leapt upwards, and in an overhead arc, slashed the bat downwards onto the felled opponent. In a savage swing, he raised it again and brought it crashing down on the quickly shattering mirror. The crystal spirit rushed back to Orson Fiennes at the mental pleading from his partner, restoring his flagging reserves of energy that upped his resistance to damage. But it hardly mattered. Comrade Cosmos raised him over his head, flipped him around, and pile-drived his head into the ground. Already dazed, the blow nearly knocked him unconscious. If his crystal spirit hadn't been putting nearly all its energy into protecting him, he certainly would have been, or worse. The spirit merged with his uniform to pull him away and quickly walk him back before the comrade could do any more damage. In response, Cosmos raised his hand and belted him with a concussive beam that knocked him back over. Orson's head cleared, and he pulled himself to his feet this time. The crystal spirit returned to its nesting place in his eye to recharge his endurance as the comrade shot another beam at them. Orson raised his shield and took the hit. He was sent skidding backwards a few feet before the spirit conjured up some of its energy to meld the ground around his boots. Without missing a beat, Comrade Cosmos switched to his eye-beams and meticulously began to rake them across Crystal Crusader's shield. The shield was being cut apart. The ground released Crystal Crusader, and he charged Cosmos, hoping to tip the scales in his favor. Cosmos kicked low with a shockwave that swept Crusader off his feet and followed up by grabbing him mid-air and slamming him into a nearby pillar. Crusader was out. The crystal spirit panicked and zipped into a nearby crane, transforming it into a powered metal golem intent on protecting his partner by defeating the comrade. Comrade Cosmos blocked the blow of the crane arm, looked the golem up and down with a vertical slice of his eye-beams, and still gripping the arm that had attacked, reached out with his other and pulled the golem apart, splitting it in half down the middle. As the metal monster was torn in half, he saw through the wreckage the shattered form of his mirrored commissar, being wailed on by a feral Kid Cosmos. Fire flicked behind the comrade's eyes. In a split second, his shoulder crashed into the younger-looking Ashfelian, smashed him through a pillar and into a thick, reinforced wall. He ripped the bat from Kid's hands and broke it across his face. A stabbing pain shot through his back, and he grabbed at whatever the cause was, but found nothing. Spinning around, he saw Sekhmet Scion, already winding up for another blow. He blocked it and pushed her back into the room, the two of them fighting through an arena of their downed allies and enemies. Sekhmet dove under a swing from Cosmos, dove under the large man, and leapt up behind him, striking with her arm blade at his back again. He spun and knocked her back with a concussive beam, then fired with his eye-beams, trying to shoot her down from afar. Then, a sharp crack of an explosion from behind him. Cosmos had pushed Scion far enough away. He glanced back, quickly. Renaissance Man, at the control panel, it a sputtering wreck. Hunched over by his wounds, face hidden behind mask and scarf, Cosmos still detected a sense of triumph from him. "It's over," Sekhmet said. "There will be no launch." Comrade Cosmos raised an eyebrow.
"What kind of trick is this?"
Now it was the turn of the two Stormbreakers to show confusion.
"I stopped the launch sequence of the ICBM," Renaissance Man explained. "Were you not launching it?" "We," Comrade Cosmos asked in dark bemusement. "What would nuclear annihilation give to the Soviet people?"
Kid Cosmos sputtered blood, crouched on all fours from the vicious blow he had received. "An end to their suffering," he mocked viciously.
Sekhmet shot him a warning glance, but with his swollen eye he likely didn't notice.
To be clear, neither you nor your people were behind the attempted launch? She asked.
Hardly, Comrade Cosmos said, easing into a more relaxed stance. Some of his people were stirring now too. The broken man was slowly dislodging himself piece by piece now that no one was there to stop him, and the giant began to stir from his slumber. We were here to stop a quote-unquote rogue NATO faction. We disabled the control room first. Renaissance Man slowly circled the room, back toward Sekhmet's side, while Kid picked up the curled-up dynamo to bring to Sekhmet. She laid her hands on the speedster, and he slowly started to heal. If that's so, Renaissance Man said, where are the soldiers that worked here? I don't know, Comrade Cosmos answered plainly. They were gone when we arrived. That's crap, Kid said angrily. Of course, now that you shattered our psychic, you think you can lie to our faces. Comrade Cosmos's face didn't change, but he slowly shifted his gaze from Renaissance Man to Kid Cosmos, a slow and heavy gesture like a 100-ton gun coming to bear. What was that phrase you used? He asked softly. He didn't need to look at the broken mirrored man to convey what was on his mind. Kid Cosmos didn't look away, to his credit, but his jaw remained firmly clamped shut, and his already weakened stance seemed to sway a bit more. Enough, Sekhmet Scion said, stepping between the two, unfazed by the glares that were burning holes in the atmosphere. Somebody just set us all up, someone who apparently doesn't care how many of us burn in the end. Comrade, we both are now invested in discovering their identity. Perhaps we can pool our resources. The comrade laid off the heavy stare for a moment to evaluate Scion, pondering his options. Then his eyes flicked to the side, something distracting him. He held up a finger and turned to the side, putting his other hand up to his ear. He was receiving a message. As he was taking it, Sekhmet gestured for Renaissance Man and Dauntless Dynamo to gather up the rest of their injured teammates. When Kid started to follow, she held up a hand to stop him. The Broken Man and the Giant were doing likewise. Neither the Stormbreakers nor the Commissars much acknowledged the others, but kept their distance. As Renaissance Man was picking up what remained of Psycherge's shattered body, Comrade Cosmos said a few words in Russian and then turned back to the others. Our time here is done, he said to Sekhmet Scion. And what of the setup? She asked. A mistake, to be sure, he replied darkly. But there are more pressing matters. So soon? Perhaps it is not a coincidence. We could... It is of a purely internal affair, Cosmos said warningly. Scion nodded slowly, unhappy and unconvinced, but maintaining a neutral expression. Cosmos turned and waved for his men to follow, the giant carrying Ironclaw in the eye, the broken man carrying, quite frankly, another broken man. As the comrade walked towards the door, his eyes met Psycherge's. Even behind his mask, Psycherge's eyes were alert and scanning. Cosmos realized what happened, and for a second looked as if he were going to start the fight again. Then he changed his mind and walked out. The Premier Commissars gone, Sekhmet turned to Kid. What were you thinking? She hissed at him. He scowled before replying. You weren't buying that story about no one being here, were you? Fishy, Renaissance Man said. But if someone could set both of us up and actually set the missile to launch, you can't discount the possibility that they made a few hundred men disappear. We've seen stranger. True, Scion said, but that wasn't all I was referring to. Aside from your other comments provoking him, you were beyond the pale with that mirrored psychic. So what, I'm not supposed to fight the bad guys? I'm going to give you a second to consider a less foolish response. It was a fight, and you felt what he could do to your mind. Is that all? It was just the effects of his power, because I did feel those effects, and while the inflicted visions were strong enough to have lingering side effects, I felt them end after your first strike. Rashida, it was the heat of battle, Dynamo said, trying to interject on his friend's behalf. A lot of us were getting pasted. You know how things can happen when you're desperate. I do, Scion agreed solemnly, but Jeremy's no rookie. You've worked just as hard as the rest of us to live up to a higher standard. I can't believe it was just this power or the heat of the moment. I think you're stronger than that, she said the last to Kid Cosmos directly. Kid searched for the right words, still clearly frustrated. If this is related to Jack's death, then perhaps we... No, Kid Cosmos said harshly. It isn't. It's not about Dad, it's about... He hesitated for a second, still searching, and then, like a dam bursting, it all came pouring out. It's more about my sister, but more than that, it is his power, but it's not. You're right, I'm not going to lie, I didn't get subsumed by his visions or psychic attack or anything, but it still hit me. You saw it, how he digs into your past? He dug up a lot of things Greta told me. Everything I knew and feared, and things I hated and didn't know I hated or feared or whatever. Starvation, gulags, near slavery, mind-controlling propaganda choking out every inch of daily life until mothers who accidentally stepped out of line from the party, forced to work until they die, lie to their daughters that the party is blameless and tell them to go join them, and sons all too eager to turn in their fathers because the family's only use is to keep everyone loyal, and every day the lie that things are getting better as more and more suffer because to get away from the weight bearing down on you and the eyes watching you, you lie about how well you did, and then your boss lies, and then the party lies, and suddenly on paper everything's a paradise, but everything's better, and mom and dad are dead, but you don't talk about them while you smile at your brother who you hate, and... He stopped in a choking, crying fury, his arms trembling. The others remained silent for a moment. "We understand," Scion said, gently holding him. "We agree with you. It is horrible and monstrous. If for an instant I thought we could do anything, we would already be there. The unfortunate reality is that the bomb outweighs even us." "Don't give me that," Jeremy sniffed. "Alright, fine, I was out of line when you were talking, but I'm not going to apologize for the fight." He looked up intently at Rashida. "You know as well as I do that they're not slowing down. The Comrade has kept the cruel engines of his little empire running for decades, and it's not slowing down. This is going to end one day, and when it does, it's not going to be pretty. But if on that day they have one less super in their arsenal because he fell during a fight, you won't see me shed a tear." Scion considered him a long time. "Fine. You and Diego call in the jet and get it set down on the landing strip. I'm patching up the rest." Jeremy nodded, though he understood perfectly well that this wasn't over. Still, he took his chance and left with Dynamo to do as Sekhmet Scion asked. While her healing powers were ineffective on Ashvelians or Crystal and Spirit bodies, they did wonders to heal up Crystal Crusader, No Man, and Renaissance Man. As she was starting to heal them, though, Renaissance Man spoke. "There's something you should know," he said. Psychurge got a glimpse into the Comrade's mind when he let his guard down. "The message he got?" "Yes," Psychurge replied. His voice was strong for the crippled body, though that was of course due to its artificial nature. Psychurge himself wasn't hurt. He would need time to repair the construct body, but his mind was perfectly intact and working as if he were uninjured, because, of course, his real body had no injuries. "While the Commissars were away, something was stolen from them." Crusader was healed up. "This was all a distraction? To lure them out?" "Probably not that simple," Renaissance Man answered. "It might have made for a good distraction, but then why get us involved, or risk a nuclear war?" "You're thinking this was a plan B," Scion suggested. "Something like that. If this is the same group behind the Fatal Harmony and Air Force One incidents, then they would leap at the chance for mass destruction. If I were in their shoes, yeah, the ICBM is Plan A, and while it's going off, we prep Plan B." "And what is that? What did they take?" "You of course know the mini experiments the Soviets performed to create supers?" Psychurge asked. "I suspect we saw some of those today," Scion confirmed. "What was stolen was a mechanism key to that process, a mechanism designed to channel the power directly from the Great Earth Dragon." "And use it to make supers," Scion shuddered slightly. "Yes, and no," Psychurge continued. "This is only one mechanism. As I said, it is designed to connect to the Great Earth Dragon and his power." "Oh no," she realized. "You realize the problem," Renaissance Man confirmed. No Man, now healed as well, bowed his head. "The Great Earth Dragon's power need not only be used for supers. With a power like that, once controlled, one could do anything." Next time, the clock starts ticking again. Now, the mysterious group that has orchestrated attacks against the President, the Earth Force, and nearly brought about nuclear war has access to one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. What will they do, and how can the Stormbreakers find them with so little to go on? These and more revelations next time on the Mirage Barrage.